the millennial vote was really quite astonishing, and never has an election, if I can deal with the primary for just a minute, never has an election turned more on how old you are among people voting in the Democratic primary than any election exit polls, flawed though they may be, have ever measured. Bernie got 71% of voters under 30, Hillary got 71% of voters over 65, and as the age cohort rose, their votes, Bernie's vote fell and Hillary's rose with each successive age cohort. And then, I began to say, okay, well, what is it about, millennials, A, are entering the job market when the traditional job has more or less disappeared, and what there are gigs and temps and part-time and independent contractor, whether actually independent contractor or not, jobs. There is the overhang of student debt. There is a measured ideological leftism that is astonishing because they know American capitalism, many of them know, American capitalism isn't working. There is just a whole range of data, including one of my favorite data points. More Americans under 30 are living with their parents right now than at any time since the census of 1940, which was still, the last year of the Depression. And I don't think this is because millennials love their parents more than any previous generation since 1940. I think it's because they can't afford to move out of the home. So there was that. Obviously, the people I know at the Prospect, at the Washington Post, everywhere else, were pretty much all thinking in the last couple weeks that Hillary was going to win. And we had a meeting at the Prospect 2 days ago to go over, what did we miss? One of the things that we missed that I'm sort of upset about years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, before actually the two Princeton economists' data came out on the declining life expectancy of white working class Americans, which is rather amazing. We wrote, Monica Potts, who was then writing for us and now is elsewhere, but a terrific reporter, who comes from Arkansas, a white woman from Arkansas, a young person, did a great piece on this and going back to her hometown. And looking at this, and then we had this report from Angus Deaton at Princeton and his collaborator, whose name I shamefully forget, about declining life expectancy. The only part of the American population for whom this was true, of people in the white working class, and that should have been an alarm bell in the night politically. As well as just otherwise for any other reason. And having written this earlier, I was, having had this in the magazine earlier, I was saying, okay, we dropped this ball. And, it's one of many balls. When you talk about a lot of pushback, no great enthusiasm about Hillary among younger Latinos, I'm afraid we can broaden your focus group to most other Americans. So look, I mean, the reasons the election turned out the way it did were many and varied, ranging from James Comey to misogyny to racism to xenophobia to not a great campaigner to you name it. But we who have been writing about the declining economic prospects of the American working class for decades, those are some of the articles that Ed and others have inflicted on their students that I've written. We who've been writing about that have, in some ways, at election time, we don't quite put two and two together sufficiently. We've not had a neo-fascist candidate as such running before, so we hadn't quite plugged that into the equation. But obviously that was a mistake. We should have plugged that into the equation. And the more so because this is not a phenomenon, as you all know, that's unique to the United States. We're seeing this throughout the industrialized world at the moment. We're seeing a point at which capitalism is not delivering the way it did, at least for white men, in the 3 decades after World War II. And eventually, that's the kind of scenario in which Donald Trump's and Marine Le Pen's and Viktor Orban's in Hungary and the folks in Alternative for Germany and others arise.
All right.
It's a dangerous moment. And I think as we envision what kind of defenses we need to erect in this moment, that may be part of this discussion going forward.
Laura.
Well, I want to start by saying I think it's fantastic how many people showed up. And the good news of this moment is how many people are gathering in how many rooms to talk about this election. The bad news is the extraordinary American appetite for both surprise and self-pity. You're like, wow, we live in a post-apartheid, not quite post-apartheid state. How surprising. Second, poor us. I mean, I think that we need to recall this moment does not compare to living under slavery. This moment does not compare to living under ISIS. This moment is a moment of possibility. I want to go back to Jamila. And it didn't start last Tuesday. I mean, I think my frustration, we started covering this story. I mean, at the very least, I felt like we started covering this election in 2008. We looked at the backlash to the Barack Obama election. And the backlash was what brought us Trump. You think the Tea Party was just some parallel thing? No, it was a feeder institution, a gateway drug for segregationists to get into the Republican Party and feel good about themselves.